Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God, Amen. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Through Jesus Christ our Lord, for thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Thank you, everyone. Please make yourselves comfortable. So, I'm going to introduce today with a very short story. About 20 years ago, or a little bit more, I first came into contact with the idea of Indigenous Australian spirituality. And that got me thinking about the Indigenous community in general. And it struck me that Coptic Orthodox Christians in particular have an affinity with the Indigenous culture in Australia because there are so many similarities. Copts are the original inhabitants of Egypt, right? And as the Australian Indigenous people are of Australia. Australia was overtaken by foreign people who took control and made them second-class citizens. Egypt has a history of that. In fact, we've become very good at that. As far as I remember, and Vassilis will probably correct all my errors when he stands up, but I'm pretty sure that for something like the last 3,000 or 4,000 years, Egyptians have lived under invaders, you know, the Hyksos, and then the Greeks, and then the Romans, and then the Arabs, and well, we're still there. So we've also had our spirituality kind of marginalised and pushed into a corner, while a different way of looking at God has sort of predominated. And I think that's happened to the Indigenous people. Our language has been under pressure and under threat, and Indigenous languages are under threat. I could go on, but I think you get the idea. And then it struck me at some stage, but you know, is that really the case? Am I really an Indigenous Egyptian? And then one of my close relatives went and did a DNA test. You know those DNA tests? And it tells you 15%, I don't know, Jewish and 13% this and that. Well, I will read it out to you. It only has one item on the DNA test report. Coptic Egyptian, 100%. So my theory was confirmed. We are the Indigenous people of Egypt. All of that is by way of introducing our speaker today, who we're very, very privileged to have with us. Vassilis is a very accomplished academic, but he is also just a really nice guy, if he'll allow me to say that. And we really appreciate that he's with us today. He has not one, but 2 PhDs. One in the sociology of religion from Athens, and one in studies of religion from the University of Sydney. He teaches, I hope the bio I looked at is up to date, at Western Sydney Uni and New South Wales Uni. Anywhere else at the moment? There's probably a few more, he's just being modest. He specialises in the political phenomenology of early Christianity, patristics, Byzantine philosophy, the history of religions, and Indigenous Australian studies. So we have an expert with us today to help us explore this topic. He's authored and co-edited more than 10 books and too many articles to count. He's covered a range of topics over a range of periods of history and dealing with, in addition to Indigenous spirituality, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. And he has been really interested in Indigenous Australian spirituality for some time. So he really is uniquely qualified to explore the interaction between Orthodox Christian spirituality and Australian Indigenous spirituality. He will not be looking at it specifically from the Coptic point of view. That's correct, isn't it? He'll be looking at it from a more general Orthodox Christian point of view. But, you know, hopefully Copts, we're part of that world as well, so it'll be very relevant to us today. So, with no further ado, I would like to invite you up to the podium. Vassilis, welcome.
Thank you, Abuna. Thank you, everyone, for being here tonight and sacrificing a bit of your time. I hope the whole thing, is good enough, and you're not disappointed, with the time you're gonna be here. Now, actually, I was very, very surprised when Abuna asked me to be part of Alithia, the group, and come and talk. Not to come and talk, but I was surprised about the topic. I thought, you would ask me to speak about something else, but not about Indigenous, indigeneity, Australian Indigenous life worlds, and how they relate to Christianity or Orthodox Christianity in particular. Because, topics that relate to indigeneity are a bit, let's say, picky, and people tend to be reserved. They don't want to touch, upon this and deal with it, because there's lots of political correctness or incorrectness involved. But although I was surprised, I was quite, glad, because it's a topic very, very close to me. Since I first started studying scholarly Indigenous Australian life worlds, which goes back to 1999. So it's more than 25, 26 years now. And of course, you can understand that once you get into this sort of study and research, then the questions of comparison pop up naturally. And I have been pursuing that comparative sort of twist in my research for quite some years now. Actually, the first time was in 2002, when I first came back to Australia as an adult. And I gave a talk then at St. Andrews Theological College on the, let's say, the sort of appreciation from an Orthodox point of view of a very specific book that had come out, and that was a book on the so-called rainbow spirit theology. So it's a very small book. It's very hard to find, but it's about a very innovative, very sort of interesting and intriguing theological movement within Indigenous Australian Christian circles. There's some other movements as well, like, for instance, Kookaburra theology. And that kind of stuff. So, yeah, that was my first thing, imagine me coming from Greece, and starting my PhD here, and coming across, Kookaburra theology or rainbow spirit theology. And what is all this? So, yeah, since then, it's a non-stop engagement. Now, the topic that actually, we talked about the topic, but you sort of formulated it, and I said, perfect. And it's basically, that's what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to talk about the intersections. I find it a very pertinent term, because as you will see, and as I will try to argue, it's very easy to talk about, common things or similarities, whereas things are more nuanced. And I think the term intersection captures this sort of nuance between Orthodox Christian spirituality and Indigenous Australian spirituality. You see here an artwork, okay? And some of you might, think, what sort of artwork is this? What sort of Aboriginal art is this? Which Aboriginal person made this art? Now, this artwork is not made by an Indigenous person. It's made by a Greek Cypriot lady called Katerina Todorovic. a friend of mine. Now, I'm putting together an exhibition for Katerina later this year. It will start from Canberra and it will come to Sydney. It's called Cyprus Dreaming. And she's a Greek Cypriot, of course. She's a painter, but she has been, influenced by motifs of indigeneity, and the Greek Cypriot and the Indigenous, based on her memories from childhood, merge. And so you have this sort of, result. And when I came across, in 5 minutes, it was there, because we were talking, she had transformed, herself in 5 minutes into an Indigenous artist. I'm just opening a parenthesis here. There's lots of talk, if you are allowed to paint as an Indigenous person, Now, what you are not allowed to do is to paint a story that does not belong to you and you do not belong to. There's no prohibition as to use motifs, influences, from Indigenous art. There's no such thing. But Indigenous art, per Indigenous, as Indigenous, quite Indigenous, tells a story. Now, if you are telling a story that belongs to me and does not belong to you, to my group and not your group, you don't have the authority, you don't have the right, and you don't know the story properly. So Katerina is not painting any stories of other people. She's painting her own childhood stories. Okay, I close the parenthesis here. Because this is going on YouTube, so, we are, we're making ourselves, in advance, sort of safe. Now, spirituality, you see here spirituality. It's a tricky word. I made once, I delivered a lecture under the title, Indigenous Australian Spirituality. Is there such a thing? Is there any sort of spirituality? Spirituality, is a term very common. Nowadays, it's very common in Christian circles. We use it and we regard it as very, natural. But basically, the term is a Western Christian term, specifically, and as such, it's very prominent in Roman Catholic piety and contemplative thinking. There's nothing bad with this. I'm just saying that it has a very, very specific historical root. And as a Western Christian sort of thing, it comes into Australia and it's taken up by, at a certain point, Indigenous Australian Christians. And that's when they start speaking about their own spirituality over against, the dominant Western Christian spirituality. So, if you ask me, was there any spirituality prior to 1788? Was there? No, there wasn't. No such thing. Indigenous people, before the invasion didn't know about spirituality. They didn't have any sort of spirituality. They acquire spirituality, in the 20th century, not even the 19th century. In the 20th century, they start acquiring this within the framework of what we call pan-aboriginality, which is the unification of experiences and the creation of one thing we call Indigenous Australia. Okay. Now, anyhow, that's a sort of, introduction on spirituality. As far as we live in an era where we do have experiences which we term spirituality, I'm using the term. And we all understand what we mean by this. And we basically mean what? We mean what makes religion really religion. Not the surface, not the institution, but something that is deeper, something that in a way represents the gist of religiosity. That's spirituality. So, I had a post, a reaction to, the post about this event by a fellow Greek Orthodox friend, Peter. I won't say his surname. Perhaps some of you have seen his surname on social media. And Peter was, saying to me, look, because you mentioned that, Abuna, in your post, that, the indigenous peoples of Egypt are the Copts. And he said, I suppose, this can be corroborated by DNA. And indeed it can. But then I don't know if, there are similarities, he was saying, between, the Coptic indigenous populations and the indigenous Australians. What sort of similarities are you talking about, Vassilis? By the way, he knows a lot, and he's very learned as to indigenous Australia, but that's where I wrote something about what are we comparing? What are we really comparing? Because a comparison can be in itself very tricky. Now, are we doing a one-to-one comparison? I mean, is there a thing we call Orthodox Christianity and a thing we call, Indigenous Australia? We tend to think, yeah, there is. Now, from a purely historical point of view, okay, there's no one thing we call Orthodox Christianity. There are Orthodox Christianities, okay? There's diversity. And even more so, okay, before the invasion, but even after the invasion, at least throughout the 19th century, there is no such thing as one indigenous Australia, one indigenous culture. Not at all. Indigenous Australia is a very pluralistic condition, culturally, let's say religiously, in terms of life world, ways of life. Huh? So, to the extent that nowadays we tend to conflate, Orthodox Christianities, and we tend to think of Indigenous Australia as one thing, yes, there is a one-to-one comparison, but that shouldn't, be regarded as, let's say, a filter through which we have to look into the whole history of the thing. One to many, again, one Christianity, one Orthodox Christianity to many, Indigenous Australian spiritualities or life worlds or whatever you want to call them. I have my own term, you will see as we go on. So it's better to always keep in mind that we are talking about orthodoxies. Okay. Yes, we are talking about orthodoxy and the dreaming, but also about orthodoxies and the dreamings. Okay. Perhaps as a scholar, I feel personally, perhaps it's a personal thing, I feel better to take into account and into consideration these differences, these small differences, these subtle, differentiations. So always keep in mind that I will have that in mind when I'm talking. Now you see here another picture, another painting. Okay, this is of course not Katerina Todorovic. This is another friend of mine, another lady, who is called Christina Tsaousoglou. Christina Tsaousoglou has a different style, and this is a very sort of naturalistic, but at the same time, a very symbolic. You see the black and white. You see the kid, which of course brings to mind Stolen Generations automatically, but at the same time, the lamp, and the lamp is very symbolic of Christianity. So you see the interaction of the black world with the Western Christian lamp, which is Christianity's gist, the meaning, the message, the gospel of Jesus. So that's there, and it's of course the background is the land. The background, all this is played out on the land. Now, basically, we will be doing a comparative, phenomenology of the sacred. The indigenous people of Australia, like any peoples, okay, any culture, any civilization, is formed around, on the basis, or under the spell, if you prefer, of something that they regard as their sacred. So, to the extent that we have, in orthodoxy or orthodoxies, something as sacred, simply put, the Holy Trinity. Then, to the extent that indigenous Australian, life worlds here and there, when I'm talking about life worlds, there's names to this, like Viranjuri, Pichajanjara, Yirkala, Walpiri. It's specific peoples. I'm just not going through the names all the time because it's a bit, they sound funny with the way I say them, but we also kind of go through all the names, it's like 300-400 names. So it's very specific peoples we're talking about. So each one of them has their own sacred. So every time you are supposed to compare what they regard as their sacred with what Orthodoxy regards as its own sacred, and see the intersections, the differences, the convergence or divergence, and how these can be accommodated and even, why not, managed in a way. Now, commonalities. Now, when you compare, you can talk about commonalities, you can talk about similarities, you can talk about equivalences, you can talk about compatibilities. A commonality is something which is common. It's like one thing we both share, but it's there, one thing. It's not two things that look alike. That's a similarity. So either you are trying to find a common thing. Is there a common thing between these cultures? There is a common thing. The very fact of humanity. That's a common thing. The very fact that, both of them, or all of them, centered around a notion, an experience of the sacred. That's a commonality. Now, are there similarities? Yes, there are similarities. There are, what I would say, elements in the life worlds, Orthodox and non-Orthodox, indigenous, that have, structurally, they suit one another, they fit one another. They are close to one another. And then you have equivalences, which is what? You don't have elements that are either common or similar. They're different. Okay, they're two different things. But they function in the same way. They serve the same purpose, or they have the same intention. Now, this is what intrigues me the most. Those non-common, non-similar things that have one and the same what? Intention, purpose, function. So, I'll give you an example. Before the invasion, was there any sense of, a deity in Indigenous Australians? Up there in the sky? This is the famous, high god or sky god, debate. No, there wasn't. No. But there was something there that the indigenous peoples themselves, this is very important, the indigenous peoples themselves, after, some decades of interaction with the whites, said that this is the creator. This has made Bayami, for instance, in Southeast Australia. And they start painting Bayami, like who must have been, a manifestation of the land, like one amongst many others. But suddenly, through the interaction with the whites, this specific manifestation, figure, becomes the creator, becomes the one who has made everything and who dwells in the sky. So they themselves, the indigenous people, take something from what we call, the deposit, the capital of their sacred emotionality, and they in a way, related to something they see in the Western Christian religion as, the same thing. And they put the two over one another to compete. What, are you talking about a God creator? Are you talking about someone who created the universe and, it's your God, your Trinity? Okay, we have the same thing. It's called Bayami. But they wouldn't have realized it. They wouldn't have come to this sort of understanding if it wasn't for the invasion and the competition. So this is an equivalence. It's very, very important because for what it's worth, it comes from the peoples themselves that point to it. And then we have compatibilities. Compatibilities is something like, look, you have 2 things, 3 things, 4 things. There's no commonality, no similarity, no equivalence. But at the end of the day, they can work together. It's not black and white. Even black and white work together. They are not opposites. They're not there's no antithesis here. They can work together. And at the end of the day, I think that an argument that wants to relate Orthodox Christianity, or Christianity in general, and Indigenous Australian sacredness, has to go back to this understanding of compatibility, if anything. And then sameness versus otherness. Indigenous Australian, as I call it, hierophanics, okay? The notions about the hieron, hierophanics, the sacred, is about sameness. Everything is the same. Everything is the same. Nowadays, it's very easy for us, if we think a bit and, go through what we have learned to school, to say that we are made out of the, stardust. We're stardust. So we and the stars are the same. And I suppose this thing is the same, and this is the same with me, We are all the same. So indigeneity stresses sameness. Christianity stresses otherness. Otherness. Why? Because we have this understanding of the created and the uncreated is the total other. Okay, I don't know, perhaps everything within the created order is the same. But there is a different thing, a totally different, which lies out of, beyond the created order. So this otherness is about Christianity. So are we going to stay at the level of sameness versus otherness? Okay, like 19th century? Or are we going to see sameness as otherness? And otherness as sameness, which combines the two. Now again, this artwork is from Christina Tsaousoglu. You see the colors, the indigenous colors, the yellow, black, and white, which are very basic indigenous colors. Blue is not, of course. And it's a reflection, one reflection of the other. Is Indigenous Australian hierophanics a type of paganism? Now, another post, by a Copt this time. No, we had a Copt, I don't know the guy. One of the first comments, when you did the post was, what are you going to do there? You're going to, is this possible? How are you going to talk about, the faith and related to paganism, to, pagans, They thought that Indigenous Australia and what it represents hierophanically, religiously, spiritually, is paganism. So, what's the relationship between the two? What are you going to talk, on the 24th of August at the church? There's no topic, there's no argument. Now, in order to understand, this objection and to go over it, because it's a very interesting objection, you have to have in mind, theism, polytheism, and monotheism. I suppose you are aware of the words, the terminology. Theism is the notion that there is a personal God who cares about the universe. That's theism. Now, when you understand this God as one, it's monotheism, of course. When you understand it as being, more than one, so there's more than one gods who are personal and, are interested in human affairs, it's polytheism. Now, paganism is related to polytheism. But before we go there, it's interesting to just to complicate a bit things. I like complicating things. There's actually, the terms are not really good. I mean, not that good. Because if you go to, for instance, a Hindu, modern day Hindu, and you say to them, like someone who belongs to the Advaita Vedanta, monistic tradition, that you are a polytheist. They will look at you as if you really, really, insulted them. My tradition is Vedanta, Advaita Vedanta. There's no bipolarity, there's only one thing. What are you saying? I'm a polytheist. But you have this god, this goddess, this god, this god. You have, hundreds of thousands of gods. Yeah, but these are, superficial. They are just the surface. They are there. They are manifestations. We wipe off the surface and we go deeper. It's just a start. So what? So the term polytheism and monotheism can be misleading. Okay, for instance, and you know this. Okay, if you ask a Muslim, are Christians monotheists? What's most likely the answer you're going to receive? You must be joking. No, no Muslim really understands Christianity as a monotheism. Whereas Christians have the self-consciousness of being monotheists. So there's some, not just external, but also internal indications that the terminology doesn't really capture things. And an alternative terminology is nature religion and history religion. There is a type of religiosity that is based on nature. It's about nature. It can be, our immediate nature. It can be my human nature. It can be, the universe as nature, Physis, nature, natura. Or it can be religion based on history, on events, on things happening. Not, on the regularities of nature and the cycle of nature and, whatever we experience as a pattern, a natural pattern. So Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Zoroastrianism, Baha'i faith, what's the other one? Sikhism. All these are history-based religions. Their basic concern is about the revelation of otherness, total otherness, within sameness. And what happens? Zzz, it's a zzz, like a, how do you call that? It's a circuit. Short circuit. Yeah, βραχικύκλωμα. Short circuit. Something happens. This is the event. That's, what makes the gist of Christianity, Judaism, Islam, and so forth. This short circuit. In nature, you don't have such things. You might have something, which is, terrifying. Or it fills you up with awe. But there's no, nothing really, going wrong. Everything goes okay. Everything is okay. Huh? That's why, polytheism and nature religion never really poses a theodicy question. A theodicy question is a question that arises in a history religion, where things, can be problematic. They are problematic. Now, Christianity, when it appeared, this type of polytheism or history religion, when it appeared, slowly, what was there before in the Mediterranean came to be known as paganism. Okay, paganism, in this sense, is a certain period in the development of ancient Greco-Roman religiosity. And it's there after the advent of Christianity. So when you talk about paganism in Australia, you are totally off the, I mean, you're out of, you're somewhere else, there's no such thing. It doesn't make sense historically, it doesn't make sense phenomenologically. Why doesn't it make sense? Because there's no theism, there's no God. There's no God in that sense. Paganism is about gods, everywhere. In Australia, there are no gods. There's no deity. The so-called ancestors are not gods. They're not God figures. Everything is about, in a very specific sense, nature. So we also have what we call sacromonism. Monism is there's only one thing. Okay. For instance, Advaita Vedanta or ancient Greek philosophy, like this, the Stoics. One thing, monism. And this is sacred. And there's also the other part, which is pluralism. There's lots of things, and they are sacred. So the sacred plays out either as one or many. But the sacred, the same sacredness. So what we have in Christianity, we have, the triune God. So we have triunity, which is basically a monotheistic pluralism. If we want to, use other terminology, it's a monotheistic pluralism. 3 as 1, 1 as 3. And it can be seen as over against a monism, in the case of Australia, monism, the land, monism. But this is sacro-pluralistic. It's expressed in various sacred ways, which is the dreamings with a small d. The indigenous people only knew about dreamings. We have to wait till the 20th century for William Stanner, a very famous anthropologist, to come and coin the term the dreaming. And then the indigenous people, picking it up and making it their own. And saying, yes, Stanner, you're right, there's the dreaming. Which means what? Wasn't it there before? It wasn't there before, but the indigenous people understood that what Stanner perceived allowed them to stress a certain aspect of their own cultural capital, bring it to the forth, bolster it, and make it more evident. So Stanner became an instance for their own process of self-realization. He brought it out of them. So, Trinity and the land. Trinity and the land. And this is where the whole thing with Christianity, or Orthodox Christianity, because there's lots of Christianity, so and not all of them talk about the Trinity, or at least not all of them are interested so much in the Trinity, and the land. Okay, this is how this has been played out, this relationship, and how it's going to be played out. Topos and utopia. Now, my supervisor at Sydney Uni wrote his PhD, his own PhD, by using the term topos and utopia. The famous, this is his own, Tony Swain. Tony Swain wrote this book on a land for strangers. Australia has always been a land for strangers, open, come. Has never been a closed land. So this book he writes based on topos and utopia. Topos is land in Greek, topos, land. And utopia, okay, has lots of connotations, of course, but the basic meaning is a non-land. So Christianity represents utopia, doesn't represent topos. Topos comes in the experience of Christianity only incidentally, or for a purpose. The aim is the utopia, which is beyond topos. It's not here. Okay, remember St. Paul, Okay, our politevma, our polis, our, our own, city, is not here. It's not of this world, It's of the future. So this is utopia over against topos. Topos is land. Now, this artwork is from Uros Todorovic, and it's about transcendence. Transcendence. It's going up. It's supposed to be a human being. It's very abstract. Now, I had an exhibition with this artwork early this year, and our father came with his 2 kids, very perceptive kids, and he asked one of the kids, and he says, "What do you see? What do you see in the?" And you know, amazingly, the little boy said that I see a waterfall. He was seeing, you know, the exact opposite. You know, not something going up, stretching, but something coming down. A waterfall, like, you know, water coming down, like, because it is icy, you know, sort of bluish. And I thought, look, indeed. I mean, the going up is the coming down. It's a two-way thing. It's a two-way thing. And it's about topos and utopia. Topos is about here, you know, coming down and rooting yourself here. Utopia is about going somewhere else, beyond the here. So the picture captures both. Total otherness and total sameness. This is a very famous understanding of the Godhead in Christianity, Judaism, Islam, by Rudolf Otto. Rudolf Otto, a very famous German religionist. And he uses this very famous phrase. It has become a catchword for us. You know, das ganz andere, which means the totally other. That's God. Well, and you can use this, Rudolf Otto says, to understand global religions. Yeah, but when I started, you know, doing my PhD and I had to understand indigenous Australian religions, there was no total otherness because there was no God. So what would be the overarching term I would be using? And that's when I coined another term by inversing things, the total sameness, which is in a way a total otherness, because what's the total sameness? I mean, I'm same to you, you know, you are to me, we are to this table or to this, you know, board because we can touch it. Everything seems to be, you know, relatively same here. But what does it mean that all this is based on what is a total sameness? What is total sameness? In many ways, it's like total otherness, but in an inverse way. Now, this is very important because Indigenous Australians are about total otherness and Christians are about total sameness and Christians about total otherness. So if these things are the inverse of one another and so close, that means that, you know, our project is already possible. We just have to work it out. Transcendence, immanence, other word, rapture. Christianity is about rapture. But indigeneity is about abidingness. Abidingness. Here, right now, here and now. The famous here and now in well-being, counseling, psychotherapy. The here and now, you know, abidingness. Well, we are all here. Okay, but the Huparon, we say, the Holy Spirit is here, it abides here. Yeah, but on the other hand, you know, we have rupture, we have something, you know, of a crack. And Christianity is much more about the cracks, the anastasis, you know, the resurrection. There's no abidingness. You know, it's a crack. It's a big crack, rupture. And innovation, the idea of innovation, of being creative, really creative, from scratch, ex nihilo, from nothing. And rhythm. In Indigenous Australia, we have a rhythm. It's not so much a circle of things coming back and back and back. No, it's more of a rhythm. It's and multiple sort of rhythms. I don't know if you have, you know, come across Indigenous art, which is about just 4 colors repeating themselves. Emily Coragny, famous, $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 if you can buy, you know. So you see the painting like, you know, just repeating itself. It's about the flesh, because each person in a group, in an indigenous group, is a certain flesh, and the flesh is, you know, white or yellow or black or reddish ochre, and they repeat themselves because we come back. We come back. We die, we go to the land, and we come back. Come back. It's a rhythm. A very, very subtle way, Karenyi has made. And then we have uniqueness in Christianity, the human person, unique. There's no one like me, there's no one going to be like me. For good or bad, I mean, that's my uniqueness. But there's no such thing in Indigenous Australia. Indigenous Australia has a variation. Everyone is a variation of something. And at the end of the day, all of us have variations of the same soil, the same place, the same land. And rescue. We have to, restoration is the indigenous. You have to restore yourself, go back to the land, be part of it. In Christianity, you are supposed to be rescued from something, from evil, from the conditions of time and space, from the fall. You have to be rescued. And Jesus comes to rescue us. We talk about restoration. Yeah. And what I want to say here is that I'm not using the terms here as mutually exclusive. I'm just using the terms in order to show this or that emphasis in each case. There's a difference in emphasis. Coptic indigeneity as Christianity. Now this, if you feel I'm not, my English is not the best, but I think it's a very sort of, idiomatic English that it's very, very interesting. Like Coptic indigeneity as Christianity. No indigeneity is supposed to be Christianity. Why? Because Christianity is not topos, it's utopia. You cannot be indigenous and be, Christian. Christian means going out of indigeneity, being out of topos, being out of place, facing the eschata, the end, the otherness of the kingdom of God. So how can an indigeneity, in this case Coptic indigeneity, and Copts are very, very proud about their indigeneity, how can this, be Christian? Now, presumably there's lots of indigeneities. There's not one understanding of indigeneity, and because you talked about indigeneity at the beginning, it's not a biological thing at the end of the day. When we say indigeneity, we mean a very, very peculiar, special relation with the land. It's not about genetics. You might be, like a Copt, like a DNA Copt, but have no relationship to the land we call Egypt. And the land, Egypt, is not just, the physical thing. It's also the cultural thing. It's the whole thing, it's the whole package that goes with the land, that has come out of the land, that has been, hosted on the land. So if you have a very special relationship to that, then that's indigeneity. It's not being the first, we talk now, the first peoples, the first peoples, the first peoples. We have found a new jargon. We used to call them Aborigines. Now we call them Indigenous. And now we call them First Peoples. It's not about who came first here. So you came first, I came second, someone came third. So what? That's very, very, it's very, very dangerous. It's very, very dangerous. It's very, very sneaky, It's an Anglo-Saxon sneaky, really sneaky strategy of diminishing indigeneity. Because, look, at the end of the day, you came first. Oh, you're the first. You want to be first? First. We are last. So who is more important, the first or the last? The last peoples, there's no one after. The last prophet, the culmination, blah, 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 we are the last. So you are the first, okay. Let the first things be yours. We have the last, saying. Now, the important thing is not being first or second or third or last, but having a special relationship to the land, to know the land. And no one has known the land as the blacks of this country have known the land. For millennia. So I'm being passionate, a bit sort of going out of myself, but no worries. Now, this is a different indigeneity. If I would like to put, the Coptic indigeneity, we call Christianity Christianity into 4 words, 4, isn't it? Yeah? Desert, monasticism, Coptic language, and persecution. There's the desert, or the physical, prominent, very prominent feature of the desert. That's part of the Coptic. I mean, now it's me, Vassilis, talking, It's how I feel about the Coptic. The desert. Now, when I say the desert, the Egyptian desert, this desert is a way. It's a way. It's a means. It's not like something you make your home and you keep it as it is, or you keep yourself there. It's something upon which you walk towards something else. It's a way. It's a passage. That's the Egyptian desert, a passage. Now, we have monasticism. Basically, monasticism, Christian monasticism, was born, emerged in Egypt. Even the first attested term in Greek, monachos, is from, if I'm not mistaken, it's from the Gospel of Thomas. The Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Thomas was written originally in Greek, and it has the term monachos, meaning someone, who stays with themselves, in a experience, in an attitude of self meditation on their own, turns to themselves. Monachos in the Gospel of Thomas. Of course, we don't have the Greek, the original Greek. We have the Coptic from Nag Hammadi, the Nag Hammadi collection. But if scholars are correct, and it goes back to the 1st century, then Egypt, the desert of Egypt, produced the first Greek term about monasticism, which is monachos, the first term we have. And the Coptic language, of course. I cannot imagine of Copts, without Coptic language. I don't know how well you're doing with that. Greeks are having problems. Well, we're strong, but we have lots of problems. I don't know. I'm under the impression that, you are really struggling with the preservation of Coptic. Yeah, but I cannot imagine, Copts without Coptic. Personally. Why? Because if the land is a way, and if monasticism is the spirit of the way, then the distinctiveness of all this is captured within this language. And of course, persecution. You refer to persecution. As far as Christianity is concerned, this relates to Islam. So the experience of Islamic persecution, displacement, has been since the 7th century, a cardinal, a fundamental, integral part of the Coptic consciousness. In a bad way? Yes and no. Why? Because it's a bad thing, persecution, but at the same time, it allows one to delve more into the spirit of the way of the desert of the kingdom. Now, land, I imagine, the Coptic indigeneity as Christianity being a land as a series of dots, that fade away slowly. That's a big talk. Perhaps we can go through it, in one of the Q&A, moments about, nationality, ethnicity, indigeneity in terms of Christianity and Catholicity. Personally, I think that, we are Christians with our whole self, and that's a historical self, and that's with our ethnicity, our nationality, with all this luggage of historicity with us. That's how we become Christians, and that's how we have to stay as Christians, and we have to work through that in order to achieve Catholicity. Catholicity is not some sort of, commonality that homogenizes everything and everyone. Okay, it would be very cheap if it was that. Australian indigeneity versus Christianity. Now, this is not as Christianity. This indigeneity is versus Christianity. Desert here is home. It's not a way to go somewhere else. It's our home. Okay, so the Pitsanjanjara can only be Pitsanjanjara when they are on the land of Pitsanjanjara. If you take them and you put them in the land of Wiradjuri, or Walpiri, they're dead. They're dead. We try to solve the problem of indigenous people in Australia. 60-70% of people, in jail are indigenous people. And we try to solve this problem by, hocus pocus, where the roots are very, very specific. The roots are displacement. I can only be who I am supposed to be on my land because I'm an expression, part of that land. Do I have a land? No, I don't. Some indigenous people for the last, let's say, 5 generations don't have a land anymore. So they're doomed. The only home they can hope being in is a jail. Because it resonates with their, reality and their. Now, this home, this desert as home, is very much related to initiation, not monasticism as in, the Coptic, but initiation. Initiation. What does initiation mean? To be integral to home. Every time you take part in an initiation, ceremony, ritual, you become more part of your home, more part of your land, your place. And at the end of the day, each and every indigenous language is a manifestation of that home, distinctive of it, and reflective of it. Persecution? Not really, but invasion, definitely. I won't go into the invasion, conquest, genocide. Okay, the thing is that this is an invasion. People came and took the land from other people. And this is what? Loss of home. Now, in the Coptic case, land was a series of dots that fade away. But here it's a nexus of dots that define everything and everyone. You see the dots of the painting? The indigenous painting? Dots. Dots are very important because they make a nexus. And they tell a story. They define everything and everyone. But you have to know how to read it. So indigenous art is very, very subversive because it shows without showing. What do you see as a Westerner? What do I see? I see dots. I see dots. So what? Dots, okay. They might be nice, they might not be nice, might be, really harmonic or not harmonious. Yeah, but the indigenous people don't see just dots. There are certain dots within those dots that make, certain patterns. And you're missing them because you don't know how to see. Huh? Give me something of your own. I will give you something, but at the same time, I won't disclose it because it's knowledge and you're not supposed to know it. But I will give it to you. So they have given us, the knowledge without giving it to us because we cannot read the art. We just see how beautiful it is. Now, indigenous insights for Orthodox theology. Now, this is the hard stuff. Nyampi. Nyampi is a word in Narrindjeri, which is, a language, people, land, place, next to south of Adelaide. They are very famous. You all know this guy, although you haven't realized, perhaps, that you know him. He's on the $50 note, David Unipen. David Unipen, this great Australian, was a Narrindjeri indigenous person, and he was a Christian, he was a pastor, he was a theologian, an inventor, and many other things. And he wrote these very nice tales. And one of the tales has the title, Nyampi. And Nyampi is the umbilical cord, what connects the mother with the baby, this bond of life. Now, this is a very powerful symbol. And everything, you see the picture there, that's again from Katerina Todorovic, everything sort of, like is magnetized, and it's going towards the womb, as if it's connected with the umbilical cord, everything. Now, this motherhood understanding of a cord of life, that gives life, that sustains, is a very powerful image that can become the basis for an indigenous Australian ecclesiology. The church as mother, as the life giver of, for all Christians that, are connected to her and to one another. We can talk about this. It's a very, very important. I've written about it. So this is a piece, from a piece. This is a sort of a paragraph from a piece that is published. So Nyampi can be the basis for a very, very interesting Indigenous Christian, Orthodox, I would dare say, ecclesiology. And this is another insight, which is about the holy rainbow serpent. I said that on purpose, because it's the Holy Spirit, the holy, rainbow serpent or rainbow spirit. Now, in Christian theology we have, like triadology, we have Christology, and we have pneumatology. Now, when it comes to Christology, when we talk about Christ, we use images of animals or plants, fauna and flora, but only in a symbolic, that is semiotic sense. Why? In just a semiotic sense, because otherwise we would be jeopardizing the very specific historicity of Jesus, who was not a vine, he was not a lamb, but he was a man. Yeah? Very, very important. He was a man. He was not only just human, a man. It's very, very important. So you can draw a lamb and, think of Jesus, or a vine and think of Jesus, or other images. But can you draw a serpent? A snake? Think of Jesus? It's a bit hard. I would say it's impossible. I would say. Yeah. You can do that, and it has been done. But how powerful could that sort of theology be in terms of, really, bringing together and sustaining ideologically, an indigenous Christianity? Not even in Orthodox Christianity, it's very uncommon as an image. It's a very, if you are not into hermeneutics and that kind of thing, you wouldn't know about it. Now, on the other hand, what I'm saying is, how are we going to use, because this is very, very important, the serpent, the rainbow serpent is very important for indigenous people. And they are going to use it. They're going to use it. Are they going to use it in terms of, their own acceptance, whatever that is, of Christianity, in terms of Christology or in terms of pneumatology? In terms of Christology, although it wouldn't be out of the question, it would be rather difficult, because the snake, the serpent, is very negative in many ways. But in terms of pneumatology, things are different, the Holy Spirit. Because, you can sort of transcend the understanding of negativity, okay? At the end of the day, the snake is a creature created by God, at the end of the day. You can always, start, taking the evil side out of it, or the negative side out of it. And then you have to invest it with different meanings. And because this has to do with the water, the rainbow, the water, especially life-giving water, all these, bring to mind, the function of the Spirit, baptism, Genesis. So that's why I'm talking about the holy rainbow serpent instead of the Holy Spirit. Don't think of it as being very, it's not big. It's a bit heretical, but it's not too heretical, because spirit, like spirit, pneuma is like a breath. Oh, I mean, come on. We're talking about God in terms of, breathing. And doesn't mind so much if we say, serpent instead of, For the indigenous people, this serpent, is very, very important. And I think it's only going to be captured, and transformed into something within the Christian identity if it's at the level of pneumatology, the doctrine of the Holy Spirit, not Christology, which is the doctrine of the Son of God. Some of my 30 questions, I have written an article, and it's about 30 questions. I don't know the answer to them, of course. but they are interesting as questions. I find them interesting as questions. Now, the questions are, further food for thought. And this is about performance versus worship. Indigenous people are about performance. Everything is a performance. Sing, dance, storytelling, painting on the body. That's how they work. They work through performance. They don't work through, intellectual argumentation, writing philosophy, and doing, that sort of thing. So, what can Christian worship learn from the indigenous employment of the arts in general, especially when it is already quite artistic, so to speak, as in the case of orthodoxy? What I'm insinuating here is, if you are going to interact with Christianity as an indigenous person, it's better to come to orthodoxy because the arts are already here. We don't have a problem with arts. They are everywhere. Chanting, colors, performance, Abuna always does this performance, every time he does the divine liturgy. It's a performance. Huh? Now, if you go to other sort of Christian, circles and contexts, things are not, quite there in terms of performance, or they are too performative. Are there certain Christian traditions that lend themselves more than others to an engagement with indigenous performativity through the arts? How could indigenous performativity facilitate Christianity in overcoming its more often than not intellectualist and argumentative leanings? Okay, and people nowadays, modern people, like contemporary people, don't like, this sort of argumentative, intellectual thing, They don't like real theology, really. The way theology has been, developed, and, they find it too Greek, too philosophical, What is this? They want something different. They prefer, the arts. To what extent can we appreciate modern indigenous art as a genuine means for Christian worship? How can the power and knowledge associated with indigenous performativity, it's always about power and knowledge. I know I have the power, the authority to paint this story. How is this, these two, to reshuffle power and charisma in Christian ministry? Now, for centuries, the authority is the theologian. But what about if the authority is not the theologian? It's the painter or the chanter or the hymnographer. And imagine, if all these can be, these roles taken up by women. It becomes tricky, The theologian bishop, And there you have, the hymnographer or the chanter or the painter who is not a bishop or not even a man, it's a woman. Things can be very, very... we talk about indigenous people there, right? When they come into Christianity and they see, like bishops there, like... Imagine those nannies, those grannies, aunties, what's this? What's going on here? What are these guys here? What are we going to do? What are we going to do? From a source of authority, are we going to become what? You think they're going to just go away? I don't think so. And of course, the 30 questions go on with pan-aboriginality and globality. Pan-aboriginality is a very, very recent phenomenon. Okay, there was no pan-aboriginality, for centuries. It's only very recent. Especially, it's very much related to the land rights movement in Australia. So it uses certain figures, like the rainbow spirit, for instance, or a serpent, is a figure of, it's a pan-aboriginal figure. Or the famous Indigenous, those rock art, figures who don't have a mouth, like from Mars, very round, and they are from, outer space. I'm joking, they're not from outer space, but they look like, astronauts, Those guanches are pan-aboriginal figures, pan-aboriginality, all sort of registers. Now, you have this. So how basically the questions, all these questions are about this very simple thing. Christianity is ecumenical. It's for everyone. It's not just about this place here. How can you be stuck here, so much, about Australia, and at the same time be part of the globe, be a global citizen, as we say, be an ecumenical person? How can this work out? Can you be a Copt and at the same time a Christian? It has worked out. So I suppose you can be part of the land, this very specific land, in very, very specific terms, by absolutizing it, and at the same time, imagining of the global, imagining of the ecumenical. I could go on and on, of course, it's my thingy, but I'm going to stop. Thank you for your patience. I hope that at least I have given you things to think about. Not so much things, like clear-cut answers or, indisputable information. Because this is something, all this I was talking about, is about something that is in the process of becoming. It's not something which was there, it's something happening. Indigenous Australian Christianity and Indigenous Australian Orthodox Christianity, which is still to be seen, for me, is an exercise in scholarly, let's say, experimentation, imagination. I'm imagining these things. At the end of the day, I'm a theologian, and theologians are all about imagination. Okay. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for that, Vassili. I've learned so much, not only about Indigenous spirituality, but also when it comes into intersection with Orthodox Christianity. It starts making you see your own faith in some different ways. Particularly that idea of being tied to the land is a really interesting area. Okay, this is the part of the night where you get to ask your questions. Now, can I suggest, we usually have a microphone here and ask people to come forward, but given that we're not a huge group today, I wonder if Matthew would be kind enough to just move the microphone around to those who raise a hand. Okay, so look, I've been writing a list of my own questions here. So while you're thinking of yours, I'll just kick off with one of them. And then after that, Matthew, if you can sort of go for it. Can I just ask you, you use the word dreaming and dreamings and explain how the plural became this singular thing. But just what is the essence of the idea of dreamings? I always find that a difficult thing to understand. Is there any sort of parallel in our own Christian structure to it, or is it something completely different?
Yeah. Now, dreaming is actually... sorry. Now, dreaming is quite a term that comes into prominence after Stana, which means after the 30s. Before that, we have terms like dream time. Now, in that sense, dream time or dreaming time, it was something that Western ethnographers made up. It's a misnomer because that's how they understood the experience the indigenous people were communicating to them. Now, I'll give you an example. It comes from the Adrahtas, which is a people south of Uluru. And they have a term, Alchiringa. By the way, all these people don't have the term, in their language is dreaming. When they use indigenous English, they say dreaming. Otherwise, they have their terms. And they have, in Adrahtas, have Alchiringa. Now, Al-Sharinga means basically something that grows out of itself. So in this sense, it has a meaning of eternity. It's always there. It grows out of itself. It doesn't. Nothing is the cause of it. So it hasn't started. It's not going to end. It grows out of itself. It's the way of saying it, eternal. But they don't mean eternity as we conceptualize it. It's something that has always been the way it is. That's Al-Sharinga. Now, you can relate to that, you can perceive that, which is, the place has always been this way in many ways. One of the ways is through dreaming, through a dream. But it's only one way. Okay, it's not the only way. You can relate to this reality growing out of itself through song, or through performance, or through initiation, not necessarily through a dream, an actual dream. Now, because they sort of understood this as being very weird, Spencer and Gillen, those two, ethnographers, the first ethnographers we have in Australia, sort of amateurists, but also sort of, really into the professional thing. They thought that they could capture this by saying dreaming. It's like a dreaming state, like an altered state, That's what they meant, an altered state of consciousness, a dreaming state. But it doesn't have to be that. It can be that, but it's not necessarily that. So that's how the thing started. And this expresses itself in many ways. And for each people, each of these ways, even yourself, when you realize yourself, you understand that you have always been growing out of yourself. You've always been there. You understand yourself as being, eternal. So you are dreaming yourself. Stana, when he came, he wanted to show that all these dreamings within a people, all around Australia, at the end of the day, are not, loose and chaotic. They are organized. So this principle of organizing them, although not spelled out, is something that makes a dreaming a dreaming. It's the dreaming with a capital D. It was like a logical sort of, conclusion or thought you had to make in order to have the system really making sense. And that's when then the Aboriginal people, really adopted it. Because they said, yes, you're right. Now, we didn't stress it, like 100 or 1,000 years ago, but you're right.
Thank you so much for your talk. I'm Coptic Egyptian. I have two questions that kind of linked into one question. But basically, you described Coptic spirituality as the dots that fade away. And how, Egypt's been colonized by everybody, starting from the Hyksos, etc. So Coptic spirituality started, like when we were talking about Coptic, is when Christianity came to Egypt. But Coptic spirituality as indigenous Egyptians was way before that. So I was just wondering if you would consider the spirituality for Coptic people be before Coptic Orthodox Christianity. And then also, I'm just I have a lot of questions in my mind. I'm really excited about this topic. But the second part of the question is, we've been displaced. My grandpa, for example, came from Egypt in the 70s, but before that he had 6 generations of people in Egypt that never left Egypt and never left their particular land. So that displacement would affect many generations from here on in. But yeah, like I was just wondering, like, yeah, you mentioned like Islam was probably the more recent one, but before that, the Hyksos, you know, English people were eating mummies. Like, it's been going on for years. So just curious to know what you thought about that.
Look, I'm not an expert on Coptic history, Coptic civilization, and Coptic things in general. From what I can say and what I know is that absolutely the Coptic, as we say, the Hellenic, the Coptic doesn't start with Christianity. There are dispositions, there are elements, there is a capital there of, experiences, experiential, realities that, as I see it, thanks to Christianity, through Christianity, really came to fruition. It is thanks to Christianity, within Christianity, that the Coptic really matured and became what it was supposed to be. That's how I see it. Perhaps I'm wrong. I don't know. But I see the Coptic as something being there, like a phenomenon which is sometimes more intense and perceivable than others, period. But when Christianity comes in, and especially after the 3rd century, it becomes what it really was supposed to be. It's like the Coptic, through Christianity, realizes it's, to use Aristotelian terms, it's entelechy, its cause of being, its purpose of being. Why was it there in the first place? Okay, that's something you see in Coptic Christianity. You see the Coptic, the best of the Coptic. I don't know if I'm answering, but that's the only answer I can give. Okay.
Thank you.
So nowadays, can you be a Copt without being a Christian? It's very easy, No, you cannot. You cannot be a Copt without being a Christian. I mean, you can pretend being a Copt without being a Christian, like you can pretend being a Greek without being a Christian. There's also Greeks who say, oh, I don't need to be a Christian to be a Greek. Yeah, if you go 2,000 years before, and start writing history again, then yes. But you have this history. Even if you are not a believer, when I talk about Christianity now, I'm not talking about believing, I don't have some sort of measurement of believing. What I'm saying is about structures, about experiential structures, about ways of being in history. So Christianity, at the end of the day, is a way of being in history. Now, if you believe, okay, you can always be part of that of that way of being in history. And in Egypt, this goes with being a Copt. In Greece, it goes with being a Greek.
I have a kind of related question to that, because, and I'm going to try and articulate this as best I can, because this is still a very new idea to me, and it's still kind of jumbled in my brain, so forgive me if I have trouble articulating it. But I find the idea of, as you said, with pre-Christian Coptic religion, I guess, that its full kind of potential or maturity was reached when it was introduced to Christianity. And I think you kind of mentioned something about that with, Aboriginal religions as well, being that they realize certain things about their religion, about having a sort of godlike figure or something like that after being introduced to Christianity. And as much as I kind of I'm kind of quite drawn to this idea that, every religion kind of at its full maturity comes to Christianity in sort of a way, I do feel like if maybe I was in the position of being in a religion that was kind of intruded upon by Christianity and then told you kind of have to adapt or die sort of a thing in terms of what you believe. Is that, I don't know, would that not be seen as kind of like losing something, or I don't know, because it could be seen as like, Aboriginal religion matured into a fuller understanding of itself by being introduced to Christianity, or it could be seen as Aboriginal religion having to alter itself to survive in a nation that was invaded by Christianity. How do you deal with that conflict?
I understand what you're saying. It's a hard question, but it's also an easy question. Okay. Yeah, why? Because you're presupposing that there is something there that could be lost. You are presupposing that that something had an identity without change. But the Coptic is not something. The Hellenic is not something, that was there and was handed down. It's a way of being. So it changes. Did they lose something? Presumably. But it's not like losing, what you had and being left with nothing because you lost that thing. It's like, being, having certain potentialities taken from you and only allowed certain others, if I may say so. So after Christianity, the way to be a Copt is through certain channels and not others, because those others have been, in a way, blocked or taken away, or they have ceased, dismissed, yeah. And from a certain point onwards, it's the people themselves who dismiss of them, amongst other things. The same happens with indigenous peoples. They could evolve, let's say, change, develop in certain ways before the invasion. Due to the invasion, the spectrum of potentiality becomes narrowed, but also it's redirected. At the same time, there are potentialities given that were not there. So the given spectrum becomes narrowed, but at the same time, new potentialities, are offered, and it becomes enriched. So, and the same goes for the Hellenic as well. Did the Hellenes go on after Christianity? The Hellenic, did it go on after Christianity, after 1st, 2nd, 3rd century? Of course it went on. It went on until, the 6th century, we have, the last pagan philosophers. 6th century. According to potentiality that was there, or according to potentiality that was informed, conditioned by the presence of the new, which is Christianity. To give you another example, do you think that the ancient Israelite religion would have evolved the way it evolved into rabbinic, Judaism without Christianity? No, it wouldn't. Rabbinic Judaism develops the way it develops because it has to counterbalance, a new adversary. And that's the Christian religion. That's the basic notion that, the Messiah has come. If the Messiah has come and we have not accepted him, then what are we doing? So you have to reformulate your whole hierophanic capital in a way as to counterbalance, and create an argument that is to reshuffle, restructure your whole identity, and that takes, a millennium in order to form rabbinic Judaism. So don't think of, these things as being Hellenism, Judaism, the Coptic as being static. Okay, now, look, history is a nasty thing, it's not about things happening, good things happening, or only bad things happening. That's how it works. That's the condition of its being. And that's its historicity. I don't know, just, yeah.
So I read a book by Bart Ehrman on how Jesus became God, and he mentioned that during the time of antiquity, there was that idea of, you know, the spirit realm and the physical realm not being far apart, and that kind of relates back to when you were talking about topos and utopia. So I don't know if you have any like insights, but like with the early Christian church, how were they having these conversations with those people with that mindset? The same way how we as Christians today can have those conversations with, you know, the Aboriginal and Indigenous people. If you have any insights on that regard.
Yeah. How Jesus became a God. Now, there were two ways to go about this thing. One way was to say, who said that Jesus was God? God. Like what? Like Dionysus? Like Hera? Like Hermes? Are you serious? Are we claiming that Jesus became such a God thinking? That's very low of our understanding of Jesus. So when the early Christians, you know, talk about gods, you know, they talk about a certain thing, you know, a dominant thing. So there's lots of ways to talk about divinity. That's why we have the Nicaea Council, you know, and Arius. Was Arius saying that Jesus is not divine? He was not saying that. Arius was saying that Jesus was divine. He was just saying that the divinity of Jesus is not the divinity of the Father. Not that he's not divine. You know, there's lots of divinities. Even you are divine, a Greek would say. I'm divine. Everyone is divine. Everything is divine. Jesus, of course, he's divine. Because there's this assumption that it was difficult to think of Jesus as being divine. Rubbish. It was very easy. Very, very easy. The thing is, what sort of divinity are you ascribing to Jesus? Not if he's divine. So you would either say, look, to be honest, Jesus is not that sort of God. Huh? Or you would say, look, if we're going to use God for Jesus, look, Jesus is the only God. All the other gods are rubbish. So there's two ways to go about this. It's not an easy way how a man was understood to be more than a man. The basic thing was how to understand divinity, divinity as being, there right in front of you in the person of Jesus. That was the thing. That was the hard thing. Not if a man was understood eventually through, magic, philosophical terminology to become a god. But how do you think of the divine in its absoluteness right in front of you in the person of Jesus? That was the question. That was the issue. And that was something that, it was simply very hard for not very hard. It was nearly impossible for the ancient world to appreciate. For the Israelite. Now, when I say Israelite, Israelite can be a Samaritan. Israelite can be a Jew, can be a Judean. That is, can be a Galilean. Anyone. It was much easier to understand that God, is working exclusively, absolutely, in the person of a man, the Messiah, than for the Greeks, the pagans, the polytheists, to think of the divine in such specific terms. Because for the Greeks, the divine could only be understood in generic terms, abstract terms, as general as possible. That's the whole gist of metaphysics and ontology. They cannot think of a very, very, very specific man in time and place, being related exclusively and absolutely with divinity. But the Jew could. It was easier for the Jew. Although scholars like the one you referred to start from the assumption that the Jews think that, Jesus was the Messiah, oh man, and, at a certain point he became understood as some sort of divine figure. Which is a very, very, Enlightenment, late 18th century understanding of the history of religions. Has nothing to do with, the Israelite religion, the Jewish self-consciousness of late antiquity. And we know about this because we have other sources that talk about figures, specific figures, as, the bearers or the means of divine revelation. For instance, from Qumran, from the Essenes, who, use language that is, mind-blowing in terms of, how they understood the specificity of the divine. So a Messiah God, the divine Messiah, is easier for the Jew to conceptualize in the first century than a divine human man, for the Greek.
Just before we go to the next question, can I just mention that there's a very good book Bart Ehrman wrote, How Jesus Became God. There's a book called How God Became Jesus, which sort of goes through his arguments one by one and kind of picks them apart.
Yeah.
I just had a question about the similarities between Orthodox Christianity, whether it be Greek or Coptic, and the indigenous spirituality. You've kind of mentioned the transition from Hellenism and the Coptic religion into Christianity, and then also the struggle against Islamic conquest later on. I'm just thinking, is the way we should be looking at indigenous spirituality, should it parallel early Christianity in the Hellenic and Coptic context, in them transitioning to Christianity, or should we be looking at it through the lens of conquest and them preserving their religion?
Yeah, interesting. Look, there is conquest, there is invasion, but that's not the whole story. We also know, that there were whites who wanted to protect, wanted to, save what could be saved. We have the famous, even the name is reflective of this, the protectors. There was a special, like commissioners, like the protectors. Of course, they sort of failed on all grounds. They didn't really manage to protect. But it's not all that gloom, sort of thing. So it's a more complicated issue. Now, are we to understand what's happening in Indigenous Australia with regards to Christianity, by taking as an example what happened in late antiquity? Not necessarily. I'll give you an example. The indigenous people, notoriously, I would dare say, resisted becoming Christians for many decades. Up to, let's say, the early 20th century, there was hardly, any group conversion to Christianity. Conversions were, individual, just here and there, now and then. You only have to compare what's happening in Indigenous Australia in terms of converting to Christianity with what is happening in New Zealand. New Zealand converted to Christianity over a night, it's exaggeration, but over a night. And we have, from the very beginning or very close to the beginning, we have a very important Christian movement and Christian leaders and prophets. We have nothing of this sort in Indigenous Australia. Nothing. Now, in antiquity, we know that Christianity advanced gradually, but steadily. You know, in 3 centuries or less than 3 centuries, it was more than 15%, 20% of the entire empire. So nothing of this has happened, you know, in the case of Indigenous Australia. Indigenous Australians have, in a way, been uninterested in Christianity. I mean, well, look, I'm not going to buy. I mean, I don't like it. I mean, have anything else? Are you offering something different? I'm talking about Western Christianity, you know, basically, Roman Catholic and other types of Protestant. Because, as far as I know, there's no Orthodox, Indigenous Australian Orthodox community or parish. None of what. There are certain people that are Orthodox, but not a parish. We don't have a community. We don't have this sort of, you know, data to really study and see what's going on there. So they were not interested, you know, in this Western thing. Somewhere, no, but I'm just giving you some perspective. So we shouldn't use other periods as a definitive, you know, filter to understand what's happening in Australia. Not even what happened next to Australia, which is New Zealand, in order to understand Australia, because it's in New Zealand you have a hierarchical, you know, society, very hierarchical, and you know, for instance, forms of Christianity that are very hierarchical appealed. And it's like, you know, taking your clothes off and putting new clothes. And you become, you know, a Christian. But in Indigenous Australia, where abidingness, total sameness, is only the land and everything is, you know, at the same level, the Christianity which, you know, came in with the hierarchical structure didn't quite, you know, how are we gonna, I mean, accommodate this? Or how is this gonna be accommodated? The one was flat, and Christianity was like a tower of hierarchy, structurally. So they were incompatible. What I'm saying with Orthodoxy is that because Orthodoxy has synodality, a different understanding of synodality, which brings the hierarchy, you know, a bit, you know, down, because it sort of, what's the word in English? Spreads out the hierarchy, the power, you know. It resembles more, it becomes more compatible to the flat surface of the land. Because at the end of the day, structures do matter. They do matter. Okay, and the way, for instance, and when I say structures, I mean like the way women are treated and men are treated, you know, and how they, for instance, why did the early Christianity, you know, why was it such a success story? You know, thanks to women. Because it gave women other potentialities which the ancient world didn't give them. It liberated ancient women. Did Christianity liberate ancient women, ancient antiquity, women in ancient antiquity, the way we think of liberation in 21st century? Of course not. But we have to think of what women were going through in the first century, okay, and how they were perceived, and what sort of, you know, leverage Christianity gave them. So in this sense, it did liberate them. It was a, what's the word in Greek? It's hieραφέτηση. Women's emancipation. It emancipated women, given the circumstances, okay, and within the limitations of the society. Suddenly, you know, you could become you could speak. You could become a focus of authority. You could, you know, be someone. You had value. That was unthinkable. Now, imagine the indigenous people who have women, you know, within the societies, who have value, who have power, who have, you know, a saying, and you calling them into orthodoxy, you know, which says to women, you know, not always, but many a time, shut up. I mean, they're not going to shut up. They're going to say, what? Are you for real? So power relation structures are very, very important because they have informed our dispositions, the way we perceive one another. Fantastite, think of you, Mount Druid, what's the parish? Archangel Michael. Imagine you come in and you sit there and the Aurea Pili, how do you say that in the Aurea Pili? No, the royal door. The royal opens, and instead of a Buna, you see a woman. What's going to happen? Big trouble. It's going to be. It's going to be a mess. The parish. Chairs. Microphones. It's going to be a mess because it's a dissonance. What is this? It's totally out of the question. Because this is one of my favorite topics, women's ordination and that sort of thing, and ministry. I've written about this. Publicly I've talked about this. I've never written, that women have to become priests, or that they can become priests. I've said that they have to become deacons because deacons is an ancient institution, and that the priesthood has to be broadened in order to bring in new roles of service that are to be taken up by women. And they are going to be ministerial and priestly. In this sense, they would be ordained to do this thing, which is, confession, for instance. Because women sometimes are much better, with dealing with people's emotions and things and well-being and how they feel, And we have some excellent, counselors out there who are people of faith. So it's one thing to say that we are going to turn the bishop into a woman, which is silly, because then you are saying that historicity doesn't matter. You stress historicity, and then you say we're going to make the bishop into a woman, or a woman into a bishop. That means that you are saying one thing, historicity matters, and then you're saying historicity doesn't matter. Now, it does matter. A bishop is always going to be a bishop, a man. But this doesn't mean that the priesthood had always to be, so manly. It can also be, more female, more feminine, with other roles and other services and other diaconias, whatever. Services, yeah. Within, yeah. Sorry.
I like the idea of what you mentioned when Christianity spreads, it brings out the potentiality of the culture and the ethnicity of the people, or the indigeneity of the people. What I find interesting that it, even though when it does that to Egypt, then the Coptic identity becomes more apparent, like you pointed out, and same thing in Greece and so forth. But when it starts in Jerusalem, because the first Christians were Jewish, it seems to, one, bring about the opposition, as you pointed out, but it also, you mentioned that other potentials start to disappear, like there's a narrowing effect that takes place, and a distinction or a clarity, but Jewish Christianity doesn't continue. We don't hear of it continuing in the way we understood when Christianity goes into Egypt or into Greece or into any other culture. It brings out their reality or their beliefs a bit more strongly. The natural becomes a bit more Christianized and baptized, but you just don't see that. Why do you think that you just don't see that as much in the Jewish Christianity, like Judaism when it became, or the Jewish people that first became Christians? Why didn't their version of Christianity continue, so to speak?
Why are you saying that the inverted commas, yes, I will return to that, yes, Jewish version of Christianity didn't continue?
Oh,
Because our version of Christianity is the Jewish version of Christianity. We continued.
yeah, it's just simply that when Christianity goes into Egypt, what was
Yeah.
present there gets baptized, for the lack of better terms, and the practices and the worship are Christianized.
Okay, let's go back a bit.
Yeah.
Let's go back a bit. Because you're saying something important, but there's lots of levels here.
Correct. Maybe I'm just
No.
overarching.
For instance, you said that the first Christians were Jewish. The first Christians were not Jewish. Was Peter a Jew? Was John a Jew? He was a Galilean. How do we know that he was a Jew? What's a Jew? A Jew is a retrospective, okay, a projection from us nowadays, in order to understand what was it like to be an Israelite in the first century. First Christians, some of them, most of them, if you like, were Israelites. Okay, they could be, from Judea, which is more or less what we mean perhaps by what Jew came to be, thought of. But they could be from Galilee.
Or Samaria.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Or Samaria. And have nothing to do with Jewish.
Yeah.
So not all Christians were Jewish. Because this presupposes a lot of things which are simply not there. Are not there. The famous saying by what was Wellhausen? Was it Wellhausen? I think so. That Jesus was a Jew. I know what we're trying to say, but at the same time we're saying it the wrong way. There's no Jew back then. There's no Jew back then. Okay. Iudeos in the scripture, Iudeos, in the New Testament, Iudeos means someone who wants to monopolize in a certain way the religious capital of the Israelite religion based on certain premises, which is the centrality of the temple, okay, most of all, the sacrifices, the understanding, a certain understanding of law. So it has been called by Paul Sanders formative Judaism in those days, what the Iudeos is all about. Jesus is on the other side of the Jew of the days, because he's saying the temple may destroy it and I will make it in 3 days. Temple, I'm the temple. The law, εγώ είμαι η οδός. Law, Torah means way. Jesus says, I'm the way. I'm the Torah. That's what he's saying. He's, systematically, consistently going against the formative Judaism of the times, of what it meant to be Jew. So it's better to say that most of the first Christians were Israelites, in a broad sense. I wouldn't use it Palestinians because it's very loaded nowadays and can be, sort of misconstrued. But for instance, when is Christianity introduced to Egypt? When is it introduced to Egypt? Do we know? For instance, in the Paul speaks about Apollo, and Apollo is supposed to be coming from Alexandria, and that's mid-1st century. So Apollo comes from Alexandria, and his name, first of all, is not very Jewish. Okay, not very Coptic, or it's a very Greek, Apollo. So you have these, very, very important and formidable. He's not some sort of, just a simple Christian. He's a very formidable Christian leader. And he comes from Alexandria. How come? So it seems that from the very beginning, if there is some value and some truth, and there is, in the narrative of the Acts about the Pentecost, it seems that, there were people who took back the message, and went back to, Alexandria from the very beginning. And they were not Jews. They might have been, very sort of friendly, open to the Israelite religion, or to what this religion was becoming in Jerusalem as formative, but they were not strictly to be understood, as Jews. Now, if I'm understanding your question correctly, is that, okay, whatever, it seems that there was a religious capital there that just tell me if that's what you're saying, that didn't go away, like in the case of Hellenism, or in the case of some other thing, but it persevered and it became Judaism. Are you saying that, or are you saying that the initial form of Christianity by these first Christians changed and became something else?
Yeah, my understanding that it did change because...
which is not a bad thing.
Yeah, I could be mistaken. I'm just trying to understand why is it that when Christianity goes into a foreign land completely, it brings out the best of their culture and assimilates Christianity with what they formerly believed, and they've got a new identity.
But the same thing, what's your name?
Michael.
Michael, the same thing it did in Israel.
But it seems like it never continued
It
on.
brought out
Yeah.
the entelechy,
Yeah.
the intentionality,
Yeah.
the raison d'être, as I say,
Yeah.
of the Israelite religion. The best out of the Torah, the best out of Tanakh, the best out of the Israelite religious capital came out with Christianity. That's what I believe.
If I can see if I can clarify something, I think what Michael may be referring to is the first Christians in that region, for example, went to the synagogue as well as holding the Eucharistic meal. And they kept a lot of their Jewishness even after they became Christian. But that sort of tradition died out.
Yeah.
That doesn't exist after a little while. Is that the
That's
question?
correct. Yeah.
Yeah, but such things, such interaction between religious capitals does happen a lot. I mean, did we have icons in the church always? No. Did we have incense in the church always? No. So we were taking pagan practices, or we were frequenting, in pagan places and looking and seeing and appreciating stuff there without that being a problem. So that it didn't go on. Why? Because we did appropriate at the end and we made it ourselves. And the same thing, to put it a bit bluntly, Christianity developed a consciousness of being so much the gist of the Israelite religion that the synagogue didn't matter anymore. Because the church is the synagogue. The Christ is the Tanakh and the Torah. You become so much, it's called competitive antagonistic syncretism.
Yeah.
You become so much, you claim so much of the other that for yourself that the other disappears. It disappears.
But if I go to Jerusalem today,
Yeah.
I find there's a bit of, especially in the Holy Land, there's a bit of Greek, there's a bit of Armenian, there's a bit of Coptic, but there isn't a Jerusalem, like there isn't a Jewish ethnic.
There are.
Yeah, maybe I could be wrong,
The Messiah Christians. There are.
Isn't that a recent movement?
It's quite recent.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's 20 or 30 years,
Yeah.
but there are, even in Australia, there are Christians who are, Jewish, and they regard Jesus as a Messiah. Now, this is a formulation, a very recent formulation, and it tries to accommodate things in a way, to my understanding, ignores historicity. Ignores what has happened the 2,000 years that have already passed. What you are saying, okay, you're calling Jesus the Messiah, Mashiach, okay, and the whole Middle East is calling Jesus the Mashiach, centuries now. And they understand the Messiah. So what are you saying? And it's like you're trying to recreate. It's like Protestantism, you know, like the Reformed churches. Oh, look what happened, you know, 16 centuries. Okay, it was bad. Let's make things right again. So what happened 16 centuries was wrong, and now you know what's right, and you're making things right. You are restoring, you know, like jumping in history like that. So, okay, what we did, you know, like sort of, you know, race wasn't really, you know, the best choice. Let's become now the followers of Jesus. So ignore 2,000 years. I mean, it's neither correct in terms of Christianity nor in terms of rabbinic Judaism. I mean, you cannot be taken seriously. I mean, I love these people. I know some of them. I mean, okay, but...
I'm afraid our time has run out. I feel we could spend quite a few more hours having these discussions. So I think at this stage, we'd like to say thank you so much, Vassilis, for
And
this
some
wonderful evening.
Yeah, thank you a lot. You know, you understand, some of these things are very sort of touchy, you know,
Yes.
and hot and debatable. But I think, I've always thought, you know, as a scholar, that it's better to talk about things, to express views, than to, you know, be politically correct, polite, don't say things the way you don't, people might be, you know, no. You know, we talk about things, we think about things, we are critical, and we engage, you know, I mean, logically. What can I say?
Well, you're right at home here,
Okay.
because the whole raison d'etre for Aletheia existing is exactly that, to bring up interesting questions.
Yeah, that's a good
And,
one. Yeah.
and to talk about them openly. In fact, we only have one rule in these meetings. You can say anything at all you like, absolutely anything. You just have to be courteous. That's the only rule. And you were very courteous today, of course, and gave us so much to think about. I don't know how much your energy will last, but if it will last a bit longer, I can see there are a few more people who wanted to carry on some discussions with you.
We can do that with a bit of coffee or...
Exactly, yes. So do please feel free to spend some more time with Vassilis. Who
Can we have a photo?
Oh, yeah, sure, we can, but only if someone has, like, something that can take a photo.
No,
Does anyone have a device that can take a photo?